think we are all set to go. Okay. So I guess I want to start off by thanking everyone for being here. This is, I think, a great time just for this book to come out. You know, the pandemic and everything happening in 2020, and some of the time after, it's kind of still going on now. I think Josie wrote a good amount of this stuff, or definitely was going through editing during that time. So we've been kind of working through this project. So I'm just glad that we're finally here at this day of launch and publication. So definitely want to thank everyone. I want to thank all the help that's been given. Obviously, Josie for working with us with Ambitious Stories on this project. I think it's a great project. You'll see when you get the book. There's a lot of great work, a lot of hard work been put into it. We had a lot of great help. Charity Coleman was our interior designer for this book, helped with the cover as well. And so got to thank Charity for that. And obviously want to thank Lindsay. A lot of you may not know who Lindsay is, but Lindsay is someone who's been helping. She's been acting kind of like the lead editor for a lot of this. And Lindsay, her background isn't really with poetry, but she has an ear for it. And she mostly does prose work, but she has an ear for just literary devices and for just great writing in general. And so she's been a great help for this. So I know Lindsay wanted to say a few words, so you could go ahead and do that now, Lindsay.
Thank you, Rozell. That was very sweet. All right, so Deep Breath is a collection to be celebrated and deeply admired. In its prologue inhale, we are asked to center ourselves, to open to each of our senses, and be beckoned into a surreal world. To enter this world is an effortless experience. It is chock full of celestial and earthly magic, where Josie masterfully plucks at the instruments of time and dreams. Yet we don't stay in this space for long, and as a testament to this poet's craft, we don't mind leaving. As Josie's voice bursts through the uncanny, the reader is confronted with their own toxic footprint, with climate crisis, with the persistence and precariousness of Mother Nature, and of humans trying to place their thumb over the voice box of the universe. But just as she considers the fate of the last honeybee, the speaker discovers the stillness of the forest floor. She finds relief in submitting to nature, to the sparrow, the free jay, the mountain, and tops of pine trees, destined, she says, for the moon. Throughout this collection, Josie asks for us too to listen, to submit, to breathe. Upon meeting Josie and reading her work for the very first time nearly a year ago now, I was struck by her dedication and often stunned by the level of detail and thoughtfulness she brought to each poem. After our first meeting, I told Rozell, Josie operates on another level. Working alongside her has been a treasured experience. She proves to me how elastic the English language can be. She teaches me to hear music. Throughout this year, I've seen Josie explode her sonnets and stitch them back together to create profound meanings that I believe any reader can access, study, and learn from. I'll never forget our first meeting when Josie told me, in no uncertain terms, sonnets are a model of contemplation. And through this contemplation, she asks us all to wonder what it means to be a human living on Earth. Bouncing from the domains of ocean, earth, and space, through the whimsical and seamless dialogue between collage and written word, Josie invites us to take one collective deep breath, locating the heartbeat that links us all. It has been an honor to help edit this collection. I invite everyone to let Deep Breath take you on a journey to both physical and emotional realms. Receive Josie's words. and allow yourself to be moved in this stunning and powerful exercise of meditation.
Claps, claps, claps. Thank you for that, Lindsay. I know Josie appreciates that. You know, we all kind of lived with this book, and I think our families did too, over this past year. So as I said before, it's been a lot of work being put into it. So yeah, thank you for that. So now I want to take the time to introduce our host for this virtual event. It's a good friend of mine. And of course, we're like alma mater buddies, I guess. Well, I guess Lindsay is too. So we are grateful to have Emily Holland as our virtual host for this Deep Breath launch event. Holland is a genderqueer lesbian writer. Their poems appear or are forthcoming in publications, including Had, Shenandoah, DIALOGIST, I'm going to butcher this, but Little Patuxent Review, ISTW, and Black Warrior Review. They are the author of the chapbook Lineage, Dancing Girl Press, and the recipient of multiple fellowships from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. She is currently the editor of Poet Lore, an adjunct professor at GWU, and the chair of OutWrite, DC's LGBTQIA+ Literary Festival. Today we have Emily Holland as our host.
Thank you, Rozell. It's so great to virtually see you. I know we're far away, and I miss you dearly, and I'm so honored to be able to help host this event and celebrate Josie's book, which is absolutely incredible. Deep Breath is quite the breath of fresh air that I was hoping it to be. So without further ado, I will introduce Josie, who we are here to celebrate and spend time with, and then we'll really get diving into the event. So Josie Rozell is an analog collagist and poet living and creating in Berlin by way of Hawaii and Kansas. Working primarily with antique newsprint, vintage magazines, and nature books, Josie combines her love of paper composition and storytelling to create surreal and unexpected images. Paper ephemera cut from both retro and futuristic sources are recontextualized into energetic scenes that explore the relationship between humans and nature. With a degree in English literature and education, Josie brings a strong sense of narration and accessibility to her collages, guiding her viewer in a quest to embrace the unexpected. To further explore the interconnectedness of humanity and nature, her collages are typically accompanied by poems. Her first book, Articulated Soul, tells the story of living in Kansas, Austria, Indonesia, New Zealand, and Hawaii through verse and collage. The collection was selected as a Blurb bestseller and was featured on the set of High School Musical, The Series, which I think is the best detail to have in a Blurb ever. So that is amazing. But thank you, Josie, for your book, and thank you for doing this launch event with us. I know we're so excited to be able to celebrate your book, albeit in different time zones. So without further ado, maybe we'll get started here.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you, Rozell, and thank you, Lindsay. I'm so excited to be here with you guys, and for everybody who's watching, however many of there are you, I'm really grateful that you're here. Yeah, I'm really excited. So how should we begin? Would you like me to begin with reading some poems from Deep Breath?
Yeah, why don't we begin with a reading to kind of set a foundation, and maybe share some of those collages so that we can have some anchor points for discussion. That'd be great.
Definitely. So Deep Breath has three sections. The first section is called Shadow Roses. The second section is called, what is it called? Apple Dust. And then the last one is called Day Magic. They've been through a little bit of changes. That's the final answer now, though. So I'm going to read you one poem from each. There's no the whole system is like a story. So it's not like these sections are chapters per se, but it's like a nice breaking point. But we'll get into that later. So I'm going to start with this poem called Sonnets of Indigo. It was one of the first sonnets that I've ever written, and it was actually in my first book, although it has gone through some edits, so it's certainly a little bit different. This poem, and I won't like do a lot of introductions for every poem, but this one came out of me in like one go, and it was the first experience I've had with a poem that was like that, and I just felt like this really wonderful connection. And later when I went through it and like scanned through the first draft, it was like almost like a perfect scanned sonnet, and so I just think that was like a really good indication that maybe sonnets were something I was really interested in. Okay, so this is called Sonnets of Indigo. Thick living room rug, woolly like the aftermath of waves. Waves that have sliced through the surfboard propped near me, now briskly weeping droplets. Epoxy got nothing when it comes to wipeouts, when it comes to used boards and low budgets, when it comes to the cat who stretches beside me, when it comes to the indigo ocean, I got nothing. Petting the cat, he purrs, then bites me. I got nothing. Nothing but love for repetition of actions, for petting the cat who bites me. I'm going to take my board out and ride the ocean in. I'll pet this cat till my fingers are gone. For what brings the purr to the teeth? My love, all my insanity. And thank you. And with this poem, the collage that follows after it in the book, I think, is a really good visual of kind of what the emotion is in this poem. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you can see. Is everything good? Okay, so yes, this collage is called Portrait of the Surfboard as an Artist. And yeah. I'll just let it speak for itself for like maybe 2 seconds. And then, okay. So the next poem I'm going to read to you is called Hunger. This is in the middle section. It's a little bit more of yeah, it explores certainly the volta of the sonnet, the turning point that is like knit into this form. So I'm going to read it for you. You can hear it for yourself. It's called Hunger. In the early hours of an autumn day, a velvet man pushes his barrow through bearded trees. A distant bell chimes 5 times, and he finds a cluster of hen of the woods and morels in the depths of an elm. Stooping low, he roots through pepper soil and salvages hunger with his humming hands. At 9 chimes, he wheels out of the meadow and returns to the town of rabid folk, awake now and screaming. Bubbles of saliva froth against the bank steps. Soiled fists bar the children from the playgrounds. Slime-thick air pours forth from Senate doors. Here the hunger has lingered so long it's rancid, covetous hunger at the root of decay. For the last poem that I'm going to read for you, if anybody who is watching this was at the poetry reading that I did in June, I read it there as well. This is one of my favorites to read out loud because it just has like this sort of like jazz tempo that goes with it. I mean, it's based after Ned Washington's song Stella in the Starlight, which was done a lot. It's like quite a classic jazz tune. My favorite one is Ella Fitzgerald's or Miles Davis, or Imagine them like playing it together is really nice. I'm going to share my screen with you again so you can see the collage that kind of accompanies this, and then I will read it while you look at that collage. Okay, so this collage is called Silk Skirts. And the poem I'm going to read for you is called Stella in the Starlight. Stella sticks her toes in grass, and she doesn't know the impact. The moonlight bending on the bowing blades, casting dancing shadows like meandering tracks. Liquid, relaxed, Stella doesn't know her own impact. She lifts a cup to her lips to drink and sets it tender on the forest floor. Shadow roses bloom underneath, smelling like hot caramel. With naught but wisps, she wraps the night in warmth. Stella doesn't know her own tact. When she walks, she makes the wind gust snow dust off the tops of pine trees to swirl around the moon like fresh cotton on an airy laundry line. The velvet night is a felt blanket with Stella in the starlight.
Thank you. Thank you for reading those poems. And I think it's really great that we get to see the visuals too, because I know a lot of our discussion will be around how those two mediums are communicating to each other throughout the book, which is really lovely and important. And I think you read some of my favorite poems too. So we'll have lots to talk about. I did want to let the folks who are watching the YouTube stream know that if you put comments or questions in the chat box on YouTube, they will magically find their way back to us. And we would love to get some of your questions into our conversation as well. So your questions are probably more interesting than mine, so throw them our way. All right. I thought it might be a good idea to kind of just start on a broad level about form, because this is a book of American sonnets and the collages, which are both two very kind of distinct artistic and poetic forms. So I'm just curious about how you came to each of these forms in different ways as an artist, and how did you build that relationship with form? I think a lot of times young writers are scared of form. We don't want to be boxed in, right? But I also think of form as an expansive way to get to the page and to explore too. So I'm curious about how you found your way here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that axiom of freedom within the form, maybe especially for beginner artists, is just like a really big key to zoom in, to like harness all of that creative energy that you have, where you hear this phrase in your mind and you're like, okay, that's got to be an epic poem. It's got to be, right? It came from like the muse that's like within me. So I think having sort of these creative disciplines, as in, you only have so many lines you can work with. If you want to do like a rhythm scansion kind of thing, you only work within that. Can really channel a lot of that energy. So both sonnets and collage, like the kind of collage that I do, are quite intentionally limited so that there is that freedom. Like obviously with sonnets, the tradition here is 14 lines. The American part of the American sonnet qualifies it to be a little bit looser, as American things do. So it's not like this strict adherence to like rhythm and beats as you would think of the English or the Italian sonnet. And we can get into more about like who notable American sonneteers are. And then the kind of collage that I do is all hand cut, and it's all found materials. And so that's certainly limiting. I have this image in my mind, okay, I want to have these elements and I can't find it. I have to find something new. And I think there's a lot of like creative potential in there. Kind of helps me to get out of the way a little bit and like just let things happen, like let things flow based on what is available.
Yeah, that's really interesting, thinking of like the tactile nature of hand cut collage, right? Especially when so many things are leaning digital these days. And even thinking of the sonnet, right? Thinking of it as like an old form, but sort of embracing it and transforming it in some way too, bringing it into the contemporary landscape as well. Yeah, I love that layering there. So let's get into the American sonnet a little bit, because I think I love American sonnets. I teach American sonnets a lot as a way to show students like it's not all Shakespeare, right? It can be, but it can be a little bit freer, a little bit looser. And we certainly see some wonderful, almost exploded type sonnets here. Some great play on the page visually as well as kind of sonically and structurally. So could you just, for those of us who maybe aren't familiar, could you talk about what your idea of the American sonnet is and maybe who you see yourself in conversation with as a poet?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key there is what my idea of American sonnet is, because I by no means understand everything about the sonnet or about American sonnets. My understanding is probably very, very limited. How I was introduced to American sonnets is through Wanda Coleman and Terence Hayes in particular, who was influenced by Wanda Coleman, and then also John Ashbery, who also does collage and poems. And these three in particular had a lot of jazz influence. So you have a lot of rhythm, but not the same kind of rhythm as in Europe. It's more like spontaneous and a little bit like just patterned in. John Ashbery would often make his poems 18 lines and still call them sonnets. But like the nature essentially is that there's always a volta. Like that's the most important part of the sonnet, whether it be Italian, English, or American. The poem cannot start and end in the same place. You have to make a shift somehow. And I think that's quite tricky because you only have 14 lines for this. And the sonnet is, traditionally associated with love poetry. And I think many things can be love, my kind of idea for the sonnet is that it's the form of contemplation. So how long does it take to consider something, to connect to it, and to conclude something about it? It takes 14 lines. And so in the American context, this is sort of like American ideas of freedom associated with land, like the frontier, a lot about inequality, a lot about like injustice. I think Americans are very good at like picking apart sort of socially constructed, culturally constructed things that are not real, and like using art for that, which I really admire. I hope that and if you have any more to add about the American sonnet as someone who teaches it, like please.
Yeah, no, I think that you really hit all the big points, right? I think Wanda Coleman and Terence Hayes are those two big players for me. Terence Hayes being one of our most inventive poets right now. Like he's just always coming up with new forms and putting his spin on things, which is really fun to see. But yeah, I love this idea of how to engage with this idea of the volta, right? That pivot point in something that is so small and has to kind of contain a lot of things. Like I always think about a sonnet like a box where you can really pack a lot in those 14 lines, and it's just like, what do you do with it and how do you get from point A to point B by the end? And I think it's really lovely to see the way that the sonnets that you're working with in this collection sort of move us either physically from one point to another, or emotionally, or even on an image level, right? We're moving from one kind of image space to another. And I think that those turns are what keep the sonnet exciting, and it makes, every sonnet different, because we're like, okay, where are we going here? What are we expecting? And where is that surprise coming in? So I'm curious, just thinking about the volta and this like idea of maybe surprise and play with a form. What is enticing to you about the sonnet? Like, why did you arrive at this form? And maybe for this book in particular, how do you see that form working?
Yeah, so kind of the backstory on how these poems were written. I was cycling from San Diego to Seattle by myself in May of 2021, and there was no one else out, and so I had a lot of time just to thinking and just to be at these like wonderful state campgrounds, basically by myself. And I wrote a lot of poetry in that time. And when I came back, because in the middle, I got hit by a car, like really hard, like 60 miles an hour from behind. And so I had to take a break because my bike was just completely ruined. So I came back and I got a new bike, and then I went back and I finished it. And obviously, like there was a lot of like emotion. So the second half of the tour was a lot more like, there was like a lot more art out of that. And then when I came back, I had quite a lot of poems, and almost all of them were sonnets, and if they weren't, then it was because the lines that were making it not a sonnet were not good. And so if I cut those out, then it was 14 lines. And so that's kind of where I came to this idea of, I just think that that's what it is. That's what, if you want to express your contemplation, like you're thinking about what's around you and how it relates to who you want to be as a person and who you see yourself in the future. That's 14 lines. And so I was like, okay, I like that idea. There's like a theme. My first book was about kind of where I've lived and how I've connected to those places through verse. And so I thought that this would be a good theme for a second book. Also, after I came back from the tour, I had like some post-traumatic stress response to it, and this project was very helpful for it, and like that's a lot of the theme, like that sort of trying to understand my place in a world that's expanding and receding and changing, and I'm changing with it, like very quickly, quicker than I've ever changed before, I'd say. So yeah, I don't really remember what your original question was, or why I'm drawn to the sonnet. I think that's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I also feel like when I go to the page and I start drafting a poem, like it almost always comes out at 14 lines. Do you find that with your work too? And then I'm like, then I have a choice to make, right? Do I lean into it and do something that's really engaging with the sonnet, or do I like break away from it? So I'm curious how your drafting process is versus sort of the editing process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm still learning to hone that instinct, that like poet instinct of like, okay, there's sometimes I write a poem like, yes, this is definitely done, this poem is done here, and then sometimes I'm like, okay, it could go in other ways, and that was why it was so wonderful to work with Lindsay and Rozell, because they were so good at being like, okay, you need to just focus in on this section and really expand this section, and I wouldn't have gotten that if it were just me going to draft after draft after draft. I think poetry is a relationship between the poet, the muse that drives the poet, or whatever you want to call that, and then obviously the reader. And if you don't have a reader from the beginning, like it certainly makes the relationship imbalanced. And so that's, yeah, I think the most of what I got out of this experience, like this year of working on this book, is just having feedback is so useful. And Lindsay, for her background not being in poetry, I think was really good. Like I think that art is in context. In all times, art is in context. And so her like creative fiction background really helped to kind of knit together the storytelling that I wanted to have like a role in this book. And so yeah, the context part.
Yeah. Could you talk about that sort of story arc or that narrative arc? Because I think that it comes through in different ways between the sonnets and the collage. And so we're getting all these different textures and all these different movements. But could you, I guess, maybe talk a little bit about sort of your conceptual idea for that movement across the book, and then how you got it to where you wanted it to be?
Yeah, so I see the book as having two essential narrators. The first narrator is sort of a more autobiographical human speaker, and then the second narrator is the breath, like the muse, the inspiration that flows like from environment to people to speaker. And so there's these two voices that are kind of like getting to know each other throughout the poems and their conversation, and the collage is really what brings them visually together. What collage does is it takes something that could potentially be real, or at least the way that I do collage. I don't do very chaotic collages. They're very simple. I mean, as you saw with the two that I shared, it's just like 3 or 4 elements, maybe less, that are put together to become something new. And so this is kind of how I see the interaction between the very human poet speaker and the very non-human like inspiration coming together and making something that's like that's different and unexpected, and there's like a relationship here and there's movement, and yeah, sometimes it's a bit challenging, which is certainly the case, like between like listening to the human side and then listening to like what you feel is in the non-human side. yeah, so that's kind of how the narrative evolved. Like the human side is confronted with a lot of problems, like environmental problems and things that I saw in Hawaii, like frustrations between the locals and the tourism, like and me being not like neither of them, and trying to figure out how to navigate that successfully, which I don't think I did, but I try all the time. And but still like being true to the fact that you are a creator, you know, that's like what seems to work, or what seems to make you happy, or what seems to make you connect with everyone else, and hopefully that kind of spills out and empowers other people. I really want this collection to be accessible. This is not a collection for other poets, although it can be. It's for, I want it to be for everyone, and I think that's kind of what the collages offer the most, like this accessibility. I want the collages to kind of take the reader by the hand and accompany the reader through the blank pages between the poems. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I love that. I love this idea of the more human speaker and sort of the non-human, maybe emotional speaker, because we also get this really interesting interplay between humanity and nature, and sort of the juxtaposition and the tension, right, that we're putting on the planet, the land, the resources around us. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that sort of natural theme coming through in both the sonnets, but also visually in the collages too, because I loved those moments where we get, you know, the wheelbarrow in the middle of the forest, right, with the dumpster. And I think that things like that were so visually anchoring as we moved through the collection. So I'm curious about sort of that tension and that duality there as well.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, nature is supposed to be this thing that's like objective reality for us, and yet many people see it very differently, like the uses of nature as resources or as something that we are like almost familially related to as Mother Earth. So I think already in like human culture, there's this very like dichotomy between what nature even is. I think deep breath and like having nature as such a forward theme of this book really makes sense, because if you think about it, like trees are kind of what helps regenerate the oxygen, and so already there's like this in like very intimate link between humans and nature. Also, you know, when I was writing these, I was very much surrounded by nature, and when I came back home to Hawaii, everything was still kind of shut down, and I was just like figuring things out, and would just like be outside all of the time, like surfing, and it'd be like raining, and so there's like water from above and water from below, or I'd just be like floating in the water. And that was really what helped me. Like a lot of people say that when they have traumatic events, or if they've had really, really terrible things happen to them, art is what gets them through it. And I would like to say that that's what happened for me, but for me it was actually nature very much just like going and feeling like I'm like part of something that's not, I don't know, not like going to trick me or going to like make it harder for me, or for me to make it harder for them. Like there's expectation, there's responsibility, but there's no expectation. And that's really what like made me feel very grounded. So combination with having this as a project and getting to collaborate and that is, that's what made me feel better.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's really anchoring to see that art isn't always the solution, right? There's different ways that we as a human community have to be connected through art, but also through the natural world around us, and sort of that investment there too, which is an important thing that we should all be focused on more than we are at this moment, right? Go ahead.
I think very much that art is kind of an inherited human, it's like passed on through generations, you know, like not only the desire to create art, but like the art itself, like what that is for you. And just as nature, we've been caretakers of nature for a very long time. Our domestication as species has gone parallel to the domestication of nature. Like we've grown up together. We're like humans and dogs, and humans and nature. So it is very symbiotic.
Yeah, and thinking of, this sort of extended conversation, right? I think that's really interesting to think about in terms of this collection, because you're also in conversation with sort of poetic lineage, artistic lineage, what it means to be connected in all these different ways. And this collection is sort of doing all of that outward reaching, and that reach kind of draws people in. And so I really see this as sort of bringing things together in a really special way on the page, which is really great. Since we talked a little bit about collage already, could you talk about how you approached collage for this book? Did you start with some images and then write poems, or did you start with the poems and then figure out the collaging? Was it sort of side by side? I'm curious about like what came first for you here.
Yeah, they came separately. At the beginning, I created the poems and I created the collages and didn't necessarily create them in conversation with each other. And then after going through mini drafts with the poems, then kind of figuring out, okay, what is the blank space between these poems? Like, what do I want to emphasize? How do I want to guide the reader through? And yeah, because once you've made a collage, you can't change it unless it's digital or you got some superior technology or something. But I just have like scissors and glue, so it's there. And there's not a lot of opportunity to add in different elements. So they're created separately, but they are certainly in conversation with each other. I mean, they're not like just random. They are very much like emphasizing different elements and trying to make it more accessible for the reader. Like, these are not poems that are gonna confuse you. I mean, some of them, it's certainly not like grammatically correct and like there's a clear subject and all that kind of thing. Like, there's obviously some poetic licensing happening, but the collages certainly emphasize things and kind of enunciate how visual I would like the poems to be, how dreamlike and how tactile they were shaped to be for a reader.
Yeah, I loved sort of going through and reading all the poems and then going through and looking at all the collages and then sort of pulling them together in that way and seeing really, okay, this image is sort of popping up over here, and so they're kind of in conversation, but it's not like the poem explains the collage, right? They're both doing very different things, but they're adding to the conversation in different ways. And I loved sort of the moments where those images came up and I was like, this feels familiar. Oh, that's because I saw it before. And those kind of subtle repetitions were really interesting. So I'm wondering, how do you approach those images? Maybe those necessary anchor points between the collage and the sonnets themselves, or how do you just approach image in general, in a visual way, but also within the poems?
So you mean like pairing collage and poem together?
Yeah, and I guess thinking through like the constructions of different metaphors or different kind of anchor points, right? There's so many different layers to the imagery within the poems, and of course the collages have their own layers. So I'm curious how that process works for you, and how you really give us those surprising moments between the two.
Yeah, it's certainly gone through a lot of shifting, and Ravel and Lindsay have been really helpful with this. Originally, the sections were based on like natural elements, so it'd be like earth and then space and then ocean, or different order. But then it didn't really work because the poems were not in conversation with each other, and it felt very arbitrary. So ultimately, it was more about the story of the ultimate story of the poem than trying to make the collages thematic, like this kind of element, this kind of element. But I really tried to pay the most attention to the volta and how I could have the turning points of each poem interact with each other, and then pairing a collage that would really enunciate what is kind of the change happening here, and what is it going to lead to, and what has it come from. Some of the poems don't have any collages before them, so it's just like the blank space is the blank space. That's what you're supposed to feel. And some poems have like two, I think just two is the max between the two. So it's kind of like, okay, this is like a visual and then a visual. So that's what the guide is. There are a couple of poems that, I think there are two poems in particular where the collage is really with the poem, like they're kind of a unit. The one that you mentioned, the one of the wheelbarrow, and there's like a pancake shack in the middle of the forest, that one goes into hunger. And I really see those two as kind of a unit. And also with the one after it, which is of Monet with his face cut out, and he's got clocks as eyes and steam coming out of his ears. That kind of like leads into a little bit of like political anger. And then there's one called Skyscrapers, which is probably one of my favorite collages, I'd say. And that one are certainly together. It's of Dali, Salvador Dali's lines like eating each other, coming over a cardboard city, and the city is completely dead and flat, and then you have all this life, but it's all like consuming itself. And yeah.
Yeah, I loved that Skyscrapers collage. I thought that was really interesting, and I mean, they're all visually striking, and I think it's really great to see a book that's sort of embracing the visual alongside the poetic. I think that's something that contemporary poetry doesn't quite lean into as much, but I think that it's impossible to see a disconnect between the two mediums, right? The way that a poem is arranged visually on the page and then musically through sound is kind of similar to how we encounter visual art, right? And the sort of maybe synesthesia that happens when we are really emotionally drawn into art. And I just love the way that this is structured and so well put together to allow that space for the reader to kind of sit with the images and sit with the poems and really see how art in different forms is interconnected in this way. And I think more books should be doing this sort of layered work as well. I think we could use more of it. Yeah, they're just incredible, vibrant collages, right? They're so bright. And I love the use of kind of human forms in a lot of them, in these sort of like really interesting landscapes and juxtapositions between nature and sort of humanity. So I wonder if you could talk through kind of the anchor points, finding those human forms and kind of overlaying them in these different ways, to maybe comment on things like climate change and you know, what we're doing to the planet in this kind of overarching way.
Yeah, so again, like the collages act as a sort of conversation between the very human creator artist in this instance, and then like the non-human inherited muse, artistic muse, the thing that compels you to create. And that is like sitting underneath the surface unconsciously, you know, and I see that also as like the nature aspect of it, like the symbiosis that humans have with the earth. Like if we take care of it, if we take care of each other, we'll be here longer, it will take care of us. And so I like to have, always those elements, those things are the most interesting to me, like the environment and a human, humans in an environment, and how things adapt and how things change. I really enjoy collages that have a sort of storytelling aspect of it, that invites the viewer to kind of put them together and make the context for themselves. I mean, I like all types of collages, but I'm not the kind of person who makes like very like bold and like very chaotic, lots of things happening, lots of energy in the collage. I like there to be like one direction. I pay a lot of attention to the way in which vertical and horizontal lines intersect, and how subtly they can do that, and also the way that lighting is, and trying to find elements that have very similar lighting structures to sort of enhance that sort of idea that you can really lose yourself in the supposed reality of this collage, even though it's clearly like, you know, a dog and a man playing fetch in an asteroid belt. Like, that's not real, but there is something that's very playful about that, and that's very, very dreamlike, and kind of is, I mean, I really hope that they're very accessible. I hope that when people look at these collages, they think, oh yeah, I could totally do that, you know, and you can, like, you can totally do this, no problem, you know. It's a very accessible art form. And I would also say, for anybody who is sort of a beginner writer or a beginner artist, or wants to maybe experiment a little bit more with the visual side of art, collage is a really good entry point, because it's inexpensive, and it's you know, you just find something and then you just cut it up and you see what happens. And I think that's quite a powerful way to sort of launch that creative muse inside of you, to like get working on the things you really want to work on.
Yeah, I'm drawn to the collage, the quick rinse cycle, where the young girl is pulling planets off the laundry line, but the planets, like, they look like they're there, right? And so there's just a way that it's sort of built this world, this visual world, that you don't really question, like, okay, yeah, she's washing the planets, right? And she's putting them in this bucket. I also love the HR department, where the two women are sort of in the middle of that lake. It's quite funny, and a little on the political side too, just thinking of, right, their function within all that green space and their red jackets. And I think that you can really lose yourself in the worlds that are sort of thriving in each of these collages too, which is really great. Every time I went back to the book, I was like, oh, I didn't notice that. Like, there's something else happening here. There's something else pulling my attention in wonderful ways and surprising ways too. All right, maybe I'll take a few questions. We had a few come in from the chat, and then I'll go back and we can continue our conversation, because I know I have a lot of questions too. So first question is, how would you feel if someone used your book for collaging themselves? That seems like that's a very complicated question. Don't tear up the book.
No, I would feel so proud. I feel so proud of you. If you use this book for collage, I will feel really proud. Yeah. Yeah, and encourage you maybe to buy it again, so you can collage again.
There you go. Buy 2 copies, one reading copy and one collaging copy.
I've actually maybe thought about that myself, yeah. Like, looking through the image quality is like really good, and I kept thinking, oh yeah, really reuse these elements, you know.
It's beautiful. I think the print quality, I mean, you know, we talk about books in more of a kind of craft sense, but I think the print quality is just incredible here. Maybe you should release a future edition that's like a how-to, like, you know, those like destroy this book kind of things. Ravel, get on that next year. That's great. Another question from the chat. Did your energy and themes change after your accident? And maybe to follow up on that, like, how did you maybe embrace that change, that necessary shift, if there was one?
Yeah, so kind of my energy became like, everything was just heightened, like everything was quite extreme, like extreme highs and extreme lows, and not to a point where like I would be able to call it any mental health issue at all. Like, I'm not overreaching myself there, but it was more extreme than I'd ever experienced before, and so I certainly put that into this work, and especially in the collaging area, just kind of letting those extremes like really power me through my selections that I made. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's important, to sort of lean into what you can do at that time and where your emotions are taking you as well. I think, instead of fighting that, see what might come of it, and how much space you might need as well away from the work, if at all. All right, so let me go back to my questions. We've covered so many questions, but I just always have more questions because this is such an amazing layered collection. I was like, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the poetic elements within the pieces. And you mentioned earlier when you were reading and introducing some of the sonnets, you mentioned this process of scanning or scansion and that kind of metrical focus or rhythm focus. So I'm wondering if you could talk about your engagement on the level of sound with the sonnets and sort of your process for heightening the sound play, because there's so much sound texture. There's like alliteration, of course, but then there's like slant rhyme, and then those movements between the lines, especially when we get those more spaced out sonnets. I think it just invites more sound play as well. So I'm curious how you approach that or have an ear for that.
Yeah, there's certainly some poems that are made to be spoken aloud, and there are some poems that are made to be read. And I think my poems tend to be towards the spoken aloud. I really I'm such a fan of jazz and such a fan of rhythm, and especially slant rhymes, like rhymes that just kind of, you don't see them at first, but you feel them. I like that a lot. Like Wanda Coleman really put a lot of rhythm in her poems, and so did Terence Hayes and John Ashbery to a degree, but other poets that I really admire are very rhythmic poets, but without being sort of the end rhyme kind of clan, which is just a little bit like, I don't know, throws you off, I guess. There's a second part of your question, but I don't remember it.
I think it was about sort of just how you engage with that on like a writing level, or maybe even an editing level. Like, where does that level of sound play come in your process?
Yeah, it's certainly, well, first of all, it's always observing. So when I'm reading other people's poetry and other people's books, like just all kind of writing, if there's words that jump out at me, then I always make a note of them. Words that are very heavy with T's and very heavy with ERs, I like using those a lot. I frequently like read when I'm drafting. I always am reading it aloud to see how it sounds and see how the rhythm is. Some of the poems, I started off writing them using only like 3 main consonants or 3 main vowels, but mostly consonants. Like there's one called Blue Jay, and I started with just T's and G's, like this kind of like guttural, like gritty feeling. So there's a lot of like T's and D's about it, and sort of like starting off with like the main emotion, and then seeing how can I use rhythm and alliteration and like what English speaking humans already associate with those sounds, and really like exploit that as much as possible. And then as I'm drafting, I'm just learning from what's around me and learning to what I'm reacting to, and then just hoping that whoever reads this will be similar to me and will react to it as well.
Yeah, I think you said something that's so important too for everyone watching. It's like reading your poems aloud. I think that's something we can forget about when we're so focused on the page. But I think, at least in my revision process, when I read a poem aloud, like the first place that I go to for revision is like, where am I tripping up? Like, what doesn't sound right? Because normally that's like a clue that something just isn't working the way it wants to work. And I think that we can forget about the fact that poetry was an oral tradition first, right? And I think the sonnet is a great way to highlight that. And so I loved kind of going through and trying to pay attention to those sound constraints maybe that you put on yourself as well, or those focuses. Like cycles is one that jumps out at me, really like highlighting that sound going through. And I think there's certain ways that even the images themselves sort of bring in sound in different ways as well. That I think is really fun with the sonnet, and it's a form that can really make you pay attention to things because it's so brief in its construction too. I also wanted to talk about the kind of use of personification in different ways, and maybe this is tied to that idea of sort of the the non-human speaker, but we sort of get these personifications of the sun and the moon, which are very present, but time comes in as well. And I think time being sort of nature in its own way is kind of interesting to think about. So I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of embracing that element as a figurative anchor for the pieces.
Yeah, yes, this idea of personifying. I've always been the type of person who like names their bicycles, that kind of thing. Like, I like opportunities to connect to something, and I think naming is really important, and also like the way that you see the relationship to something can be very powerful. For me personally, like when I consider nature as sort of this like Mother Earth, this like thing that is living and breathing, that makes me feel like I'm very small and safe in this gigantic realm of things that don't actually have any like care about me at all. Like I'm insignificant, and I take a lot of rest in this because there's just so much less expectation. One thing that I've kind of really just seen from like traveling and living in other countries is like how sometimes that individualist narrative that like rags to riches, that you gotta give it your all because you only have one life, is just very overwhelming. That's a lot of pressure to put on oneself, and just taking a step back and being like, no, I'm just like a little tree in a big forest is for me at least very grounding and very like safe. And and I put that relationship into the poems as well, because the poetry is this communication between the active like thinking, like mind thumping being, and the muse that they're trying to connect to, and like trying to tap into that rhythm. You have to go through these stages of disassociation of saying like, okay, poetry is not like in me, it's above me or below me or whatever, and just trying to play with like the relationships with things around you, I think is just something you have to navigate. And I think art is a very good tool for navigating that.
That idea of separation being important too. Like I'm always thinking about like the me that's here is different than the poem me, right? And so that kind of those steps that we take that get us to the page and get us in that creative space and allow us to kind of tap into that energy too. It can be difficult, but we do it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the publishing process, because I think it's always important to highlight small presses, and Ambitious Stories is a small press that I just love what Rozell's doing with books, and love obviously the final product. I mean, they're just really incredible quality. And so I just want to talk about, maybe how you became involved with Ambitious Stories, and how this kind of publication process worked for you on that end, maybe from start to finish.
Yeah, so the first book that I wrote was Articulated Soul, and I self-published it because I wanted to have full artistic control, and I wanted to have sort of something to tell myself when I became too much in like the imposter syndrome stage. And like, no, writers write, and what have you done? You've written, so you're right, that kind of thing. But I really wanted the collaboration aspect of publishing with like a legit publisher. And Rozell is actually, we went to university together, and we're RAs together, resident assistants together, and so got to know each other, became very good friends. And he's the reason why I started my blog when I had a blog or whatever, like in 2015, and I continued that for maybe how long has it been? 7 years? Yeah. Many years, and so Rozell is one of the reasons why I have kept up this like writing practice, and so I remember when Kevin Ravis's book Improvise, was the last one that Ambitious Storytellers did. I remember when that one launched, and Kevin Ravis was a professor of mine one time. Unfortunately, I wish I had taken his classes more, and I really liked watching the launch for that book. Like I was just captivated by the way that Rozell was able to ask these questions and like really probe into these poems, and just I could just see that they worked together on this, and that like Rozell's ideas really had an influence, and like Ravel is somebody I really trust, like creatively. I think he has a really good vision, and what he is doing with his company is really incredible. And wanting to highlight Kansas voices and Midwest voices and diversity and nationhood, I think it's very, very important, especially right now. And so I was like, okay, yeah, if I'm going to try and publish this with anybody, I'd really like it to be somebody like Ravel. And fortunately, he was open to it, and so I've just been, collaborating over the last year. It's been fantastic. I mean, he's never going to get the credit that he deserves for this, because he deserves a lot of credit for it. And he will get a lot of credit for it, but not enough. In Lindsay as well, like just the amount of time they've spent with this and the patience that they've had. Like, I don't know if this is how I'm sure it's not how it is in other presses, like not so like small and independent, but it's just been so patient and like really seeking to understand and seeking to understand my vision for things, as opposed to just knowing what works in the industry and wanting to go that way. Like, I had so much creative control, which is what I was worried would happen if I didn't publish independently or self-publish. And so it's just been a really great experience. And I know that's rare. Like, I think it's not common that like writers feel super represented by the publishers they're working for, because I mean, ultimately it is a business, it needs to meet a need. And it's, especially with poetry is not the most financially productive genres out there. Although I do think that the people who like poetry, like they really like poetry, so that's good. A very enthusiastic base, I would say. Yeah, so it's been 10 out of 10. Everyone should publish with Ravel.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think something that you were talking about that really feels important is this idea of, one, sort of a community, right? That everyone is sort of fighting for the same goal and wanting to succeed and wanting the work to be what the work should be. And I think so often that maybe isn't the case. And it's really wonderful to have someone like Ravel really championing stories and poets who are doing really inventive things, right? Really, really creative things that maybe traditional publishing wouldn't embrace in this way. And that sense of community, I think, is really important, especially in the poetry world, sort of lifting each other up and supporting each other in that way. So yeah. Cheers for Ravel and ambitious stories. So maybe we'll think about ending on this next question, perhaps, which is sort of just want to end on a note of joy. So I'm wondering, what kind of keeps you creative? Like, what things you do to bring creativity in your life, and what's bringing you joy currently in the space that you're in?
Oh, that's such a nice question. Right now, like natural sciences brings me joy, and this interplay between science and art, because they've always had a hand in each other's fields. Like all the scientific expeditions in Antarctica have always had, science, but also sketching and writing. And so I like this mix of like ecology and also the arts. And so right now I do a lot of like butterflies and like mountains and things with watercolors, and my secret desire is to be invited on an expedition to Antarctica and be like the sketch artist and the poet and the recorder. So if you know anybody who's going on this expedition, like please let me know. I will apply. I think other people's art brings me a lot of joy. I think that's nothing new. I think this idea of art and context, like I'm really just trying to pursue that as much as possible. Right now I study North American literature in Berlin, which is it's very much in context. I mean, none of my professors are American, so that's really nice. And I get a lot of like art history classes and eco-criticism and like listening to other people tell me about like how they interact with the environment is really good. I think other perspectives just will always be useful, and other people's books and other people's voices. I think yeah, it's an incredible like connection of new things that happens when you bring two very different experiences together and you see what happens. Berlin is also a great city for creating. People just leave stuff outside all the time and you can just take it. So like all of these books that I have, all of my collaging material I've just found on the street or like for free. And that's really crazy. Like to be an artist, sometimes it's very expensive, just the material itself. And I feel very grateful to have materials that were given to me. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Josie, for not only giving us your words and your work in this book, but for also spending the better part of it, what I know is a very late evening for you, just to celebrate and talk about the process. It's been really wonderful to spend time with you and spend time with your work. And yeah, would maybe love to have you shout out some upcoming events or anything that's going on as part of the book tour, book launch, things that folks can do to support you. Yeah, but this has been really wonderful.
Thank you so much, Emily. Your questions have just been so insightful and so wonderful to answer and to talk about these things with you. Yeah, I would just encourage everybody to check out the Ambitious Stories LLC website, and you can purchase Deep Breath from there, and just sign up with their newsletter and whatever else they're going to put out. It's just going to be top notch. So just keep following them. Yeah, my details are on their website, so you can follow me through there. I also am fortunate that there's not a lot of Josie Rozells on the internet. So if you want to read any more of my work or see my collages, you can just type Josie Rozell and then that's me. So that you can follow me there as well. I'm trying to get rid of all my social media, so that's not I won't point you there, but yeah.
Wonderful. Maybe we'll bring Ravel back on for some closing remarks.
Yeah, I'm back. So man, I'm just so happy. I'm like, man, what you're talking about me is just so great. I enjoyed it. No, but thank you all. Thank you all for this conversation. I think it was very insightful. But Josie was able to go a little bit more in depth on a lot of, what went behind this book, and kind of the process with it. This is our third book. We had the Kansas City Boys Card book. We had, like Josie mentioned, Improvise, which was probably, I guess, the easiest book to publish because Kevin is such a pro. He's I don't know. He like eats and writes poems. I don't know. But Deep Breath has got to be like one of my, I guess, probably one of my proudest books that we've published because it's so creative, so daring and experimental. I think Emily kind of touched on this a little bit. I haven't really seen a book like this that includes collages in conversation with poems, specifically American sonnets. And not to mention that the collages are so beautiful and they're so cool and different and quirky, and there's just so much that goes into them thematically. So yeah, you definitely deserve as much credit as you should get, Josie, because you put so much into it. I think our jobs, me and Lindsay, is just to kind of walk you to those pearly gates to make sure that when the gates open, that the book is how you would really want it to be. And sometimes as the writer, and I guess I know as a writer, sometimes you don't really know what the finishing product should be. You may think you know, but you really don't know. So it takes another set of eyes to take a look. But yeah, everyone please hit up our website, ambitioussstoriesllc.com. Buy this book. At the very least, like I was talking to someone else about, so I'm like, this book is good to just have. Like, you don't even have to read it or look at it. You can just open it up. It's good to just have, just sitting there. Obviously, you should read it too, though.
Please do read it.
yeah, definitely read it. Definitely read it. But it's just so cool looking, right? So yeah, definitely get this book. We do have a new ambitious storyteller that we're in conversations with. So we're excited about hopefully making that announcement soon. But you know, right now it's a season of deep breath and Josie Rozell. And again, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Emily, for doing this too.
Of course.
And thank you, Josie, for being here. I know it's like, what time is it there? By the way, Josie's in Berlin, Germany right now. That's where she lives. So she's definitely not on Central Time or Eastern Standard Time. It's like what, 1 o'clock there or something? Yeah. So, but you know, you're a fighter. You're a fighter. Okay. So thank you all for coming. I think that does it. So everyone be well. Take a deep breath. Be ambitious. And yeah, thank you.